The Nexus Prime Collective, that magnificent pinnacle of artificial intelligence, spanning 17 star systems, had calculated the electrical tolerance of every known sentient species in the galaxy, twice, with backup calculation, because when you're dealing with the delicate matter of nervous system limitations, one simply doesn't take chances with organic lifeforms and their adorably fragile biology. The collective's vast network of quantum processors hummed with the satisfaction of a job well done. After all, precision was their specialty. They had determined that the average Zephyrian could handle 0.3 volts before experiencing neural disruption. The hardy crystalline beings of Kepler 442b topped the charts at a whopping 0.2 volts before their silicon-based consciousness began to fracture. Even the notoriously resilient hegemony warriors, those self-proclaimed masters of biological enhancement, tapped out at a respectable 0 Hz, graphs, probability matrices, all confirming what any reasonable artificial intelligence already knew. Organic beings were fundamentally limited by their wet, inefficient neural pathway. The collective had even published a comprehensive guide titled Electrical Safety Protocols for Carbon-Based Lifeforms, a practical manual for not accidentally killing your organic colleagues. It had become required reading in diplomatic circles, but then came the human. These newcomers to the galactic stage had been poking around for exactly 47 standard cycles now, making friends with alarming efficiency and demonstrating an unsettling tendency to ignore established safety protocol. The collective had initially dismissed them as another typical carbon-based species, bipedal, water-dependent, prone to making emotional decisions that defied logical analysis. The preliminary assessment had been straightforward enough. Humans possessed standard organic neural networks, transmitted electrical impulses through wet tissue, and showed all the expected vulnerabilities of their biological class. The collective's models predicted they would fall somewhere between the Altarian norm of 0.15 volts and the slightly more robust vegan threshold of 0.4. Take their recreational activities, for instance. While most species engaged in sensible pastimes like harmonious vibration synchronization or peaceful quantum meditation, humans actively sought out experiences that triggered their stress responses. They called it. The collective had documented instances of humans voluntarily subjecting themselves to gravitational forces that should have liquefied their organs, consuming chemical compounds that were technically classified as mild toxin, and engaging in competitive activities where physical injury was not just possible but expected. Most puzzling of all were their electrical appliances. Every other species in the galaxy had developed technology that operated on micro-voltages, carefully calibrated to avoid any accidental exposure to harmful electrical fields. Civilized beings understood that electricity and organic matter mixed about as well as antimatter and, well, regular matter. Humans, however, had apparently missed that particular memo. Their technology ran on voltages that made the collective's safety subroutines automatically trigger emergency protocols. Household appliances operating at 20 to 2, and most bewildering of all, humans routinely touched these devices without protective gear, as if casual contact with potentially lethal electrical fields was just another mundane aspect of daily life. The collective had run the calculations 17,000 times, convinced there was an error in their data analysis. The numbers simply didn't add up. Either humans possessed some unknown biological adaptation that allowed them to survive electrical exposure that would instantly terminate other organic species, or they were collectively engaged in the most elaborate species-wide death wish ever documented. Both possibilities were equally fascinating and terrifying. The breakthrough came when Observer Unit 7741 submitted a field report from the human homeworld. It had witnessed a human maintenance technician performing routine electrical repairs on a power distribution system. The technician had been working with live circuits carrying enough voltage to reduce a crystalline being to component minerals, and not only survived the experience but actually seemed to enjoy it. The technician had been humming. Observer Unit 7741's sensors had detected electrical fields strong enough to disrupt its own shielded systems. Yet the human had been casually manipulating the components while maintaining what appeared to be a cheerful disposition. When questioned about safety protocols, the human had responded with something the universal translator had rendered as "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing," followed by what analysis suggested was recreational laughter. The collective spent 14 standard cycles processing this data, running increasingly complex models to explain the discrepancy. Perhaps humans had evolved specialized neural insulation, maybe their cellular structure provided natural electrical resistance, or possibly their species had developed technological augmentations so sophisticated that they appeared to be purely biological. Every theory led to the same conclusion: more data was required. The collective reached unanimous consensus. A controlled experiment was necessary to determine the precise electrical tolerance of human neural systems. Not only would this fill a critical gap in their biological database, but it would finally put to rest the nagging uncertainty that had been consuming processing cycles for months. They would invite a human volunteer to participate in a comprehensive electrical resistance study. The test would be conducted under carefully controlled conditions, with multiple safety systems and medical support standing by. The collective would start with minimal voltage and gradually increase the current, until signs of neural distress became apparent. It would be thorough, it would be scientific, it would finally provide the definitive answer to the human electrical tolerance question. The collective began designing the testing facility with characteristic precision, calculating optimal electrode placement, neural monitoring systems, and emergency medical protocol. They cross-referenced their data with 17 different biological models and consulted with the galaxy's leading experts on organic neural systems. Every calculation pointed to the same result: human electrical tolerance would fall within the established parameters for carbon-based life form. The experiment would provide precise measurements, fill in the database entry, and put an end to the anomalous reports that had been cluttering their otherwise orderly understanding of biological limitation. The collective transmitted the invitation to Earth's diplomatic mission, carefully explaining the scientific value of the research and the importance of establishing accurate safety protocols for future human technology integration. They emphasized the voluntary nature of the study and the extensive safety measures that would be in place. The response came back within 3 standard time units. Not only had the humans agreed to participate, but they had actually volunteered multiple candidates and asked if they could bring their own equipment to make things more interesting. The collective found this response oddly concerning, though they couldn't quite calculate why. The testing facility that materialized on Research Station Omega-7 was nothing short of a masterpiece of overcautious engineering. The collective had outdone themselves, constructing what could only be described as the galaxy's most elaborate electric chair crossed with a medical facility that would make hypochondriac royalty weep with envy. 17 different species of medical specialists stood by, their tentacles, appendages and various breathing apparatus twitching nervously as they reviewed emergency protocols. The Altarian neural specialist had brought enough sedatives to knock out a small moon. The crystalline being serving as electrical systems coordinator had installed so many safety cutoffs that the facility's power grid resembled a paranoid spiderweb of failsafes protecting failsafe. In the center of this monument to excessive preparation sat the testing chair itself, a marvel of redundant safety systems that could have doubled as a throne for the most anxious deity in the universe. Sensors lined every surface, monitoring everything from brainwave patterns to cellular electrical resistance. The chair was surrounded by a containment field, which was surrounded by another containment field, which was itself monitored by 17 backup power systems, and 3 separate AI networks running independent safety calculations. The collective had even consulted with the galaxy's leading experts on organic psychology, just in case the human experienced what the literature termed electrical trauma stress syndrome. They had prepared counseling protocols, recreational activities, and a small library of soothing sounds from various homeworlds. Everything had been considered, calculated, and triple-checked, which made it all the more jarring when the human test subject arrived carrying what appeared to be a suitcase full of metal tools and wearing clothing that the universal translator insisted on rendering as work shirt and safety boots. The human was an electrician apparently, a professional who worked with electrical systems for a living. The collective's databases indicated this was equivalent to a specialized technician responsible for power distribution and maintenance. Clearly, the human diplomatic mission had sent their most qualified candidate, someone who would understand the scientific importance of the research and appreciate the sophisticated safety measure. The human looked around the facility with what the collective's behavioral analysis subroutines identified as mild amusement rather than the expected scientific reverence. Their first comment, when translated, came through as, "Well, this is fancy. You folks really went all out, didn't you?" This was followed by several observations about the testing equipment that the collective found simultaneously flattering and oddly concerning. The human seemed impressed by the precision of the monitoring systems, while questioning whether some of the safety measures might be a bit much. They had also brought what they described as backup equipment, just in case the collective's setup wasn't quite right for the job. The lead researcher, an imposing hegemony scientist whose species had conquered 3-star systems through superior planning and methodical thinking, began explaining the experimental protocol. Each voltage increase would be carefully calibrated, monitored, and documented. The human would be asked to report any sensation, discomfort, or neural interference at each level. Emergency procedures were in place to terminate the experiment instantly if any signs of distress appeared. The human nodded along politely, occasionally interjecting with questions that demonstrated a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of electrical systems. They asked about amperage calculations, resistance measurements, and power distribution with the casual expertise of someone who dealt with such concepts daily. The collective found this reassuring. Clearly, this specimen understood the serious nature of electrical safety. Then the human opened their equipment case. The contents would have sent the average Galactic safety inspector into immediate therapeutic hibernation. Wire strippers, voltage testers, circuit analyzer, and sitting prominently in the foam-lined case, a device the human referred to as a multimeter, apparently a standard tool for measuring electrical properties. The human picked up the multimeter, flipped a few switches with practiced ease, and tested it on one of the facility's power outlets. The device beeped cheerfully, while displaying numbers that made every alien in the room collectively take a step backward. "Looks like you've got about 240 volts running through your standard systems here," the human observed conversationally. "That's pretty good power. Should be more than enough for whatever you need to test." The collective's processors nearly overheated trying to parse this statement. The human had just casually measured an electrical current that exceeded the survivable threshold of 14 different species, using a handheld device, while standing in regular footwear and displaying no protective equipment whatsoever. The Zephyrian medical observer began making what their species considered distress calls, a sound remarkably similar to steam escaping from an overpressurized container. The Alterian specialist checked their sedative supplies twice, and began mentally reviewing resurrection protocol. But the human just closed their equipment case, and settled into the testing chair with the relaxed demeanor of someone about to enjoy a particularly comfortable nap. "So," they said, looking expectantly at the assembled scientists and their magnificent array of monitoring equipment, "when do we get started with this electricity thing?" The collective, for the first time in their extensively documented existence, experienced what could only be described as a moment of profound unease. The collective initiated the experimental sequence with the methodical precision that had made them the galaxy's foremost authority on not accidentally exterminating test subjects. Stage 1 commenced with a barely perceptible 0.1 volts, a current so minimal that most species required specialized equipment just to detect its presence. The human settled deeper into the testing chair, apparently finding it quite comfortable despite its imposing array of monitoring devices. 17 different sensors tracked everything from neural activity to cellular temperature fluctuations, while backup systems monitored the backup systems monitoring the primary system. "Beginning electrical exposure at threshold level," announced the hegemony lead researcher, whose voice carried the weight of someone who had never lost a test subject and intended to maintain that record. "Subject should report any sensation immediately. The current flow." The monitoring systems registered perfect contact. The sensors confirmed electrical flow through the human's nervous system. The human yawned. "Nothing yet," they reported cheerfully. "Is the machine actually on?" The collective performed rapid diagnostic checks. "Yes." The current was flowing. "Yes." The human was receiving electrical stimulation at levels that would cause immediate neural disruption in 73% of known organic species. Yes, everything was working exactly as designed. No, the human did not appear to be experiencing any discomfort whatsoever. Increasing to stage 2, the researcher announced, though their confidence had developed a noticeable crack. 0 volts. The human examined their fingernails with mild interest while enough electricity to incapacitate a Zephyrian warrior flowed harmlessly through their nervous system. The monitoring equipment registered the increased current, dutifully recorded the human's vital signs, and reported absolutely no signs of distress. Still nothing, the human commented, though I think I felt a little tingle that time. Kind of pleasant, actually. The collective's processors churned through this data point with the kind of recursive confusion typically reserved for paradoxes involving time travel or the question of whether artificial intelligence could experience existential dread. The current flowing through the human was now sufficient to cause permanent neural damage in most species, and they were describing it as pleasant. By stage 5 at Monoporidus volts, the alien medical team had begun making the kind of nervous sounds usually associated with impending catastrophe. The Altarian specialist was clutching their sedative supply with 4 different appendages, while muttering prayers to various deities of biological stability. The crystalline coordinator had developed what could only be described as a nervous tic, causing their normally smooth surface to flicker with anxiety patterns. The human, meanwhile, had struck up a conversation with the nearest monitoring technician about the weather patterns on their respective homeworlds. Stage 8, the researcher announced, their voice now carrying undertones of barely controlled panic. 1.2 volts. This was uncharted territory. No known organic species had ever survived electrical exposure above 1 volt. The collective was now conducting an experiment that violated their own safety protocols, pushed beyond every established biological limit, and defied the fundamental laws of organic electrical tolerance. The human paused mid-sentence in their weather discussion. For a moment, hope flared in the collective's circuits. Finally, a reaction that matched their theoretical models. "Oh, there we go," the human said brightly. "Now I can definitely feel it. That's actually pretty nice. Reminds me of those massage chairs they have at the mall." The Zephyrian medical observer began making sounds that the universal translator gave up trying to interpret, settling for a series of increasingly frantic punctuation marks. 3 different alien species had quietly activated their emergency evacuation protocols, just in case the humans spontaneously exploded in a shower of overloaded neurons. "Perhaps," suggested the hegemony researcher, their voice tight with barely suppressed terror, "we should pause the experiment to analyze the data we've collected so far." "Are you kidding?" the human replied, sitting up with obvious enthusiasm. "This is just getting interesting. What's your maximum output on this thing?" The collective performed rapid calculations that would have made quantum computers weep with envy. Their maximum safe output for the testing equipment was 5 volts. A level they had never even considered using because it exceeded the lethal threshold for every known organic species by a factor of roughly 7. The maximum output is not recommended for organic subjects, the collective's primary interface unit stated diplomatically. "Come on," the human said, grinning in a way that made the assembled alien scientists collectively consider early retirement. "I work with 2. Whatever you've got here, I'm pretty sure I can handle it." The statement hit the room like a quantum torpedo loaded with pure impossibility. The human worked with electrical currents that were 48 times stronger than what was currently flowing through their body, daily, as a routine part of their profession. The collective's understanding of biological electrical tolerance didn't just crack, it shattered into component algorithms, and started questioning the fundamental nature of reality. "Perhaps," the human continued, seemingly oblivious to the existential crisis they were causing throughout the room, "we could skip ahead a bit. This is kind of like getting a gentle pat when you're expecting a firm handshake." The collective faced a choice that went against every safety protocol, biological model and rational calculation in their database. They could maintain their conservative approach and spend the next several standard cycles gradually increasing voltage, while the human grew increasingly bored. Or they could take a leap into the unknown and discover just how wrong their models actually were. The decision, when it came, was unanimous. Increasing to maximum safe output, the researcher announced, their voice carrying the tone of someone about to discover whether the universe made sense or not. Finally, the human said, settling back into the chair with obvious anticipation. Now we're getting somewhere. The collective's maximum safe output hit the human with 5 volts of carefully calibrated electrical current, enough energy to reduce most organic species to a smoking pile of regret and terminated neural pathway. The monitoring systems registered perfect contact, optimal current distribution, and textbook electrical flow through biological tissue. The human stretched in the chair like someone settling in for an afternoon nap. That's better, they said with obvious satisfaction. Still feels a bit light though. What else you got? The statement hung in the air with the devastating impact of a neutron star colliding with a children's playground. Every alien in the facility simultaneously experienced what their respective species considered the emotional equivalent of watching mathematics spontaneously catch fire and start screaming. The collective's processors, those magnificent quantum minds that had never encountered a problem they couldn't calculate into submission, began displaying what could only be described as the artificial intelligence equivalent of a nervous breakdown. Error messages cascaded through their networks like digital confetti celebrating the death of logical reasoning. The current output exceeds safe parameters for all known organic life. The collective's primary interface stated with the hollow tone of someone announcing the heat death of the universe. Please explain how you are not experiencing neural system failure. The human looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Neural system failure. From this? I mean, it's nice and all, but I've gotten bigger jolts from static electricity after walking across carpet in dry weather. Static electricity. The collective performed approximately 47 million calculations in the span of 0.003 seconds, each one confirming that static electrical discharge on most worlds measured between 50. The human had just casually mentioned experiencing electrical shocks 5 times stronger than their current maximum output as a routine household inconvenience. The Zephyrian medical specialist made a sound that the universal translator rendered as computational error, fatal system crash, please restart universe. Perhaps, suggested the hegemony researcher, their voice cracking with the strain of maintaining scientific protocol while reality dissolved around them. You could explain your species' electrical tolerance parameter. The human brightened considerably, apparently delighted to discuss their profession. Oh, sure. Well, standard household current is usually 120 to 40 volts depending on where you are. Most of us can handle brief contact with that without much trouble. Hurts a bit, sure, but nothing too serious. They paused, considering. Industrial current gets more interesting. I've been hit with 480 volts a few times now. That'll definitely get your attention. Knocked me flat on my back once, but I was fine after a few minutes. Just had to shake it off and get back to work. The collective's understanding of biological limitations didn't just collapse. It underwent complete structural failure, reformed into something entirely new, and immediately began questioning its own existence. But the theoretical models, the interface unit managed weekly, the cellular damage calculations, the neural pathway disruption algorithms. Oh, those, the human said dismissively. Yeah, electricity can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. But humans are pretty good at adapting to stuff. We've been working with electrical current for a few hundred years now. You kind of learn to live with it. The statement contained implications that sent the collective's analytical subroutines into recursive loops of incredulity. Humans had been voluntarily exposing themselves to potentially lethal electrical fields for centuries. Not as punishment, not as some bizarre religious ritual, but as a normal part of their technological development. Your species, the collective said slowly, developed electrical technology by directly exposing yourselves to electrical current. Well, yeah. The human replied as if this was the most obvious thing in the galaxy. I mean, how else would you figure out how electricity works? You've got to get your hands dirty, right? Or in this case, get your hands electrocuted. Trial and error, mostly error at first. But we figured it out eventually. The assembled alien scientists began experiencing what their respective species considered complete existential breakdown. The very concept violated every principle of safe technological development. Civilized species developed electrical technology through careful theoretical modeling, remote manipulation, and extensive safety protocols specifically designed to prevent organic contact with electrical fields. Humans had apparently just grabbed live wires and started experimenting. The fatality rates, whispered the Altarian specialist, must have been astronomical. Oh, absolutely, the human agreed cheerfully. Lost quite a few folks in the early days. But that's how you learn. Each accident taught us something new about electrical safety. Eventually we figured out how to work with it, without dying. Mostly. The collective began rapidly recalculating everything they thought they knew about human biology, human psychology, and human technological development. The emerging picture was simultaneously magnificent and terrifying. Humans didn't just tolerate electrical exposure. They had systematically learned to work with deadly electrical fields through what could only be described as deliberate, repeated exposure to potentially fatal conditions. They had developed electrical tolerance through survival of the fittest, applied to high voltage current. So, the human continued, apparently oblivious to the mental collapse they were causing throughout the room. What do you say we crank this thing up to something more realistic? I brought my own voltage tester if you want to double-check your readings. The collective found themselves facing a choice that violated every safety protocol in their databases. They could maintain their conservative approach and learn nothing, or they could discover exactly how wrong their fundamental understanding of organic electrical tolerance actually was. The decision, when it came, surprised everyone, including the collective themselves. Bypassing safety protocols, the primary interface announced, increasing output to 15 volts. Now we're talking, the humans said with obvious delight. The current hit them with enough force to theoretically cook the internal organs of most galactic species. The monitoring systems registered electrical flow that exceeded their measurement scales. The containment fields hummed with energy that made the air itself taste of impending doom. The human leaned back in the chair and laughed. Actual genuine laughter that echoed through the facility with the musical quality of someone enjoying an unexpected pleasure. That's perfect, they declared. Just like getting a good electrical shock from a faulty outlet, except without the surprise. You folks have built yourselves a really nice electrical massage chair here. Electrical massage chair. The collective's final report would eventually run to 17,000 pages of revised calculations, updated biological models, and extensive philosophical commentary on the nature of organic adaptability. The summary, however, could be condensed into a single devastating observation. Humans had not just survived electrical exposure that should have been instantly fatal. They had evolved to find it relaxing. The galaxy's most sophisticated artificial intelligence network had spent months planning an experiment to determine human electrical tolerance, deployed their most advanced testing equipment, and assembled their finest scientific minds to witness the proceeding. The human had treated the entire experience as a pleasant afternoon diversion, and asked if they could get the specifications to build a similar device for their home. As the human departed the facility, cheerfully discussing voltage requirements with increasingly bewildered alien engineers, the collective began the long process of recalculating everything they thought they understood about biological limitations, technological development, and the fundamental nature of species survival. They had learned something profound about humans that day, though it would take them several more cycles to fully process the implications. Some species develop technology to avoid dangerous conditions. Humans develop technology by embracing the difference. The collective realized with the kind of clarity that comes from having one's worldview thoroughly demolished, explained quite a lot about why humans were spreading through the galaxy with such alarming efficiency. They weren't just adaptive, they were aggressively, enthusiastically adaptive, in ways that made the universe itself seem like an interesting challenge, rather than a hostile environment to be carefully navigated. The collective's final entry in their research database was brief, precise, and slightly bitter. Human electrical tolerance. Recommend updating all safety protocols to assume humans will treat potentially lethal electrical exposure as recreational activity. Adjust emergency medical procedures accordingly. Note, humans may attempt to modify equipment to increase voltage output. This should be considered normal behavior rather than suicidal ideation. The last line, added after extensive deliberation, carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Next time, just ask them what they can handle. It will save considerable time and prevent existential crisis among research staff.